I've got something very special. For this video, a unicorn from the 1990s, arguably one of the greatest supercars of all time. The Acura or Honda NSX Zanardi Edition, only 51 ever made. Is a special privilege. Just love this car. It's such an iconic beast. Honda just got it right, basically. I mean, every one of these things was handmade in the factory back in Japan, produced for the European market under Honda, but for America it was called the Acura, and only 51 of these cars were made. The Zanardi Edition just dedicated to the legacy of Alessandro Zanardi, with his back-to-back wins in 97 and 98 in karts, or IndyCar as it's better known. And his commitment and style was something of legend. If you ever saw him with his last lap, last race overtake at Laguna Seca, when he basically bobbed straight across the corkscrew to take a position that nobody thought was possible to reclaim, he managed to get ahead. Well, they defined that as the corkscrew move, the straight line special that only Zanardi could pull off, but he did pull it off. He went through the gravel, came out in front and won the race in some style. Zanardi, really an incredible guy, bounced back from huge injuries in Formula 1 and in Champ Car to carry on his racing career, and just this car epitomises his nature really. It's a very uncompromising machine. Ayrton Senna famously contributed to some of the engineering on the sort of more racy R version. So there have been a few versions of Honda NSX, but this one is the most limited and special because although they did the R, that's kind of a race version with bucket seats and more sort of thoroughbred race tuned suspension, the Zanardi Edition did get beefed up suspension. It's got a stiffer rear bar to control the roll. It's got stiffer suspension. It's been lightened by about 149 pounds with the lighter wheels, the lighter windscreen in the back, and also less creature comfort such as the power steering, which some people moan about because the steering is quite heavy at low speeds. Once you get on track though, once you get moving, the steering is beautiful because it's so kinetic. You really feel everything, and that little bit of weight, low speed parking, who cares? The result when you're really driving this car is kind of perfect and well worth the weight saving. And it came with the standard horsepower in the 3.2 litre engine with the 6-speed, which was the car to have. For some reason Honda replaced that with a 3 litre engine and 5-speed with less power basically. So 290 brake horsepower is what this car rolled out of the factory with the infamous VTEC variable valve timing. You really have to rev the nuts off this car to get the most out of it. So when you're cruising around town, it feels like a sort of daily shopper, and you can run around 3,000 revs and think you're driving a normal Honda. But once you start to accelerate through the revs, it really wants to get up to 8,000 revs. It wants to be right on the red line, and that's where the power is in this little monster. So the standard Zanardi, 290 brake, but ComTech did actually tune a few of these officially with a supercharger and bumped the horsepower up to 383 horsepower. As you know, I am not a huge fan of tuning, but when it's sanctioned by the factory, I think it's definitely acceptable, and that's what the case was with the ComTech supercharger. The factory signed off on that supercharger unit, so effectively, as far as I'm concerned, this is all original Honda tuning. And the result is, you've got a car that was rare anyway. It's made even more rare. There's like a handful of the 51 cars that were made the Zanardi Edition have got that ComTech system on there, and that was the more reliable of the systems that were trialled back then. And it does give it a lot more sort of bottom end power, which the VTEC slightly was lacking. You do have to still rev the balls off this car, but there is a little bit, you can hear that little whine. The supercharger is just there working away in the background to throw you down the road. I'll be honest though, this is chalk and cheese away from a modern supercar. I mean, be honest, 383 horsepower is not that much, and unless you really are revving it, you don't have that much power compared to what everybody's doing these days with 800 horsepower or tuned up to 1200 horsepower with the exhaust hanging out the back. the NSX is not about that at all. Honda built this to be a dynamic handling car, and that's exactly what you've got. You've got a car that's compliant with a lovely interior that is a workhorse because it's a Honda, it's built to last forever, but it's got the get up and go, it's got the cornering, and it's quite sublime how it does it. It's mid-engined, again unheard of really for Honda engineering, and being the practical engineers that they are, they still manage to fit storage space in the boot and in the front. So there you go, take that one, Ferrari. But they did do it with this V6 engine, which sits slightly quirkily off centre in the rear behind me. But it's a mid-engine car, and that's what gives it the great handling. Mid-engine is the way to go. The driver sits in the middle. With the weight around him, you can feel everything that's going on. And although the power is tame, it has got plenty of life. And it still smells the way it did when it rolled off the line. This car's got very few miles on it. I think a Zanardi Edition, I think the last one traded hands on Bring a Trade for something like $125,000. I think things have moved on since then. And this one being even rarer, someone was saying it might be valued as high as $250,000, which is pretty remarkable for a car that really was in the doldrums for quite a long time. It was seen as a bit of a niche exotic, but it's gradually crept up and people have started to remember what was awesome about the NSX. The Japanese market is really kicking off. Skylines are going up in price, the Nissans, there's just a lot of interest in the engineering and sort of, I suppose, acknowledgement that basically there was a powerhouse at work, the Japanese engineering with longevity built into them, pretty awesome. This car perhaps less tunable than some of the Nissans out there. I mean, you can get hold of a Skyline or a Silvia and you can do all kinds of wicked stuff with them. And this is not a drift monster, but it's very playful. And if you really lean on it, which I'm not going to do because the owner's just watching me go around, you do feel this car is something you can really manipulate. You can play with the chassis using this lovely steering wheel, which is analog. There's no e-pass, I mean, forget that. It hasn't even got power steering, but it does have aircon. And I think that's what gives this model the edge over the R, because I like my creature comforts and I don't want to be sweating buckets in a car that you're not really going to take on track much anyway, although I am with this one. But I love the roar as that VTEC opens up. You do get that sense of passion coming through the back end. As for the modern NSX, different animal altogether. The hybrid is very technical, and it was one of those early hybrids that really didn't hit the mark. It runs out of battery after a few laps, so you never really have the same amount of power under your right foot, and that's quite frustrating. For a driver, if you want to be precise and feel like you're really in control, the modern car just doesn't have that real driver passionate DNA built into it the way the original did. This car's all about the handling and all about the experience. Plus, let's not forget, absolutely stunning. I think the lines on this thing are really beautiful, sublime. Just the shape of the wing, it's got 90s written all over it. It's not as muscular as a Ferrari, but it has got beautiful lines. It's almost understated, but with the pop-up headlights, the really cool BB wheels, the twin exhausts, and that cool profile rear wing does make you feel a little bit like the Knight Rider. I actually grew up with one. My dad had one of these back in the day. It was a dream car at the time, so I can vaguely remember driving it and being absolutely mesmerised by the power. I got to drive one more recently as well for a job in America, so I know the car fairly well, and it's lovely to get back behind the wheel, and this doesn't feel particularly tired or worn out. It still feels like it's got the same amount of power it had back in the day. But having just driven Freddie Tavares's McLaren, it does feel a bit underpowered compared to the modern generation, and it feels a little bit heavy in the corners. Can't say it's as ultra responsive as some of the modern supercars, but then that's part of its charm.